position as a moral judge, I think you should keep quiet. Because with that much blood on the barrister's head, you have no right to speak. I will speak, because I don't have that blood on my head.
Alright, so here is the second episode of the Average Canadian Tie. And I realized in the first episode I said the average tie. Or actually, I didn't even think I said average tie. I think I just said the Canadian tie. So, interesting beginning to the first episode. And in fact, the whole thing is going to be pretty unique, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, madame et monsieur, and whichever uh, gender to which you identify with. So, having said that, I wanted to point out where some disparities will exist in the beginning, because I'm sure viewers look for continuity. So, what's going on here is that I am now in the process of formatting sort of a schedule for content, types of content, what that content will be, and that kind of thing. So the cool thing about that is that it makes it so you can tune in to the specific subjects that interest you. And, if there's certain things that, I end up talking about or we end up talking about, depending on who's on with me, that make you tune out, you wouldn't have to do that. And so I'm just going to give a rundown on what that whole thing is going to look like. So usually at the beginning of the month, and this is not going by, a Sunday to Saturday schedule. It's a first of the month to the end of the month sort of schedule. So around the second or the third of the month, you'll get the first episode, so to speak, of the month, which will sort of just be an introduction to the subject matter that I have planned for the upcoming month. Now, whether or not I stick strictly to the subject matter I mentioned at the beginning depends on, if there's any type of interesting black swan events, which is red herring, the mention of black swan for something I'm going to be talking about in a little bit. But, if something happens suddenly that is sort of note or worth mentioning, it may come up throughout the month, even though it was not mentioned. That having been said, it should be known what the names of the segments are. First episode, first episode obviously is the intro bumper, average Canadian tie intro bumper. And then after that, you'll be served up with Outspoken Citizen X, which is actually amalgamating an existing channel that I had on YouTube into the channel, or into the podcast network. So you can actually go over to YouTube and check out Outspoken Citizen X, and you'll find a couple episodes that I published a few years ago there. And I hope to maybe continue some of that content style. I may even do a visual element to the podcast for some of these, depending on where we go. And then have a podcast / YouTube video sort of version of each thing, kind of like the Joe Rogan show. So, it depends on where I go. I'm still sort of in the process of fleshing this out, brainstorming and bouncing ideas off of a couple of friends and things like that. And so bear with me through the construction process. This is just as much of a revelatory process to me as it is to you, perhaps even more so to me. That having been said, after Outspoken Citizen X, you can expect to hear from The Beat, which will be discussions of mostly cultural aspects, so that would be, music. I tend to cover hip-hop, but it could be movies, it could be TV shows, it could be all kinds of things like that. Also, sports will be included in the beat. So that is something that I'm going to talk about. Just so you know, I am a Canadian who likes the Anaheim Ducks, so there will be a disproportionate amount of coverage of them. But you may be happy to know that we have Trevor Zegras and Mason McTavish, and Olin Zellweger and Tyson Hines, and all those guys that are going to be coming up to the Ducks organization, all of whom have been Team Canada stalwarts in the World Juniors. So, maybe keeping you guys up to date on those Canadian prospects as they develop in their professional careers might be ideal to some people. Who knows? I might end up being forced to talk about local hockey. I do end up usually going to see the Sens versus the Ducks when the Ducks come to town, though I did not get to do that this year because of various financial issues, but whatever the case. And then last year I didn't get to do it because of COVID. Even though I had the tickets and the website at the Sens, the Canadian Tire Center didn't say anything about any update to COVID, the game being canceled. It was canceled. And I went to Ottawa and it was canceled. So that was not exactly exciting. So in any case, so that's kind of an update on the beat. After the beat, you end up having the Philosopher's Stone, which is basically philosophical discussion of ideas, ethics, history. We'll discuss art history in relation to philosophy. Any throwovers. So, like, from any of the other sort of episodes through the month, if there's something that's kind of like philosophical or like, too sort of, this is verging on a deeper philosophical subject, we're going to throw it over to the Philosopher's Stone, and then from there, we'll go into depth a little bit more from that angle. From this one, too, is where we're going to discuss science and technology, because I want to discuss science and technology not only from an innovation perspective, but from an ethics perspective and sort of reason for use, or basically what we're using it for, and sort of cautioning on what we should be using things for versus how we are using them. Sort of a pragmatics, which is right into the Charles Sanders Peirce territory. So that's kind of Cole's notes of what Philosopher's Stone would be. At that point, we end up having the end of the month, which is the final sort of the episode 2 of the average Canadian tie for the month. So episode 1's the intro and episode 2 is the outro, where everything just kind of gets tied up into one sort of segment. The first episode and last episodes of the month are only going to be about 25 minutes. And then the middle ones, I'm aiming for half hour to 35 minutes. The Philosopher's Stone can range anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes, I'm imagining. I'm giving myself a little bit more run with the Philosopher's Stone, because I know that when I get into philosophy, sometimes I can get winded. So that's just a fact. Now today, I wanted to talk about a few things because I don't have the format in place right now, so I kind of got a little bit of a free lay of the land to just kind of do as I please. In which case, I had a few subjects that I had already written down in my journal. Speaking of journals, that is something that I wanted to talk about on my channel a little bit. I do actually strongly recommend using one. For anybody. Honestly, it's amazing the sheer amount of things that I think about through the day that I think, oh yeah, this is going to stay a core part of who I am. But you know what, in the end, maybe it does in some way, but it's not so objective. When you write it down and you reflect on it later, and it actually kind of helps you connect ideas and things that are happening to you and gives you more context to the things happening to you in your life. Probably help your memory too. And all of those kinds of things. So anybody who's struggling with memory and needs memory exercises, journaling is definitely a good one. Same thing with mindfulness. This helps you kind of center your chi a little bit. I've always found that when you swim around in your head a lot with different thoughts and you're constantly going in circles, like you're mad at somebody and you have the same thought and you're like you say it in your head and you get all mad and you go off on this diatribe and then somehow you end up back at the exact same thought, but then you're going off at a complete other angle, and it's just this aggravating process. Well, I found that whenever I have that sort of going on in my mind and I sit and I write down sort of the process that I go through instead of saying it aloud, and I get through the whole sort of from beginning to end in a logical sort of format, the next time I want to be angry about it and vent about it, I can just read what I wrote, and then I actually feel validated. I'm just like, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not like anybody really understood me, but like reading it on the paper like mirrors it back a little bit, which is better than anybody can give me. People don't really paraphrase, people don't really communicate well. So at least putting it down on paper allows you to sort of go, yeah, okay, that's cohesive, that makes sense. Um, and from there, you're actually able to communicate yourself a little better just by proxy. I mean, it's just by nature. So that's a little aside about journaling. That having been said, like I said, I had a few subjects written in my journal that I wanted to cover. One of them was mud water. I wanted to talk about mud water, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen mud water in your Facebook feeds, Instagram feeds, Twitter feeds, whatever social media feed that you use. And I had seen it for a while too, and I thought about it, and at one point I even tried to order it, but some kind of cookie error was happening, and I just at the time couldn't be bothered to fix the problem or get past it, so I ended up using the money for something else at the time. But I finally went out of the way to get some mud water not too long ago, which was cool because it came with the little mixer and like samples of their like coconut creamer and also their nighttime product, which is only one sample. But I get it. I would have loved to have more than one though, just because I actually want to get some more now. I want to get some of that stuff. I had valerian root in it and that kind of thing, and I mean it'd be great to have a little nighttime sort of snoozer rather than my bong hoots. That having been said, the mud water in the morning has been great. It actually tastes fantastic. That's the one thing I wanted to say, because I wasn't sure what the taste would be like. I was super kind of like it looked interesting, and it looked kind of normal, and I was like, well, it could be. But I was skeptical. I wasn't quite sure. I saw the ingredients: turmeric and cinnamon and cacao, and but then the mushroom. So I was like, I kind of had a general idea what the taste might be like. But in the end, it tastes fantastic. I love it. It's sort of coffee adjacent. It definitely isn't coffee, that's for sure. But I mean, I personally like it even better than coffee, even. The way you make it's a little more interesting. When you're mixing it, you want to only fill your cup halfway before you put your mud water stuff in and mix it, because otherwise you're going to overflow your cup with the mixer because it's extremely fast. I learned that the first couple times. But it's otherwise pretty good. Like, I noticed that it makes me pretty focused. I get on things. I don't know if it's placebo or not, but it seems to help with focus. I get about my tasks once I've had my sort of mud water. So, take it or leave it. That's my mud water experience. But other than that, a couple other subjects that I wanted to talk about. One of them was this Chloe Roma. I'm sure maybe people have heard of Chloe Roma, the Chloe Roma Army. She's popular on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and such. And she had said the other day something about, she's sick of the term toxic masculinity. Now, I don't disagree that there's a disproportionate representation and discussion about the term toxic masculinity. But at the end of the day, it isn't something that doesn't exist. I mean, toxic femininity is there too, and that's what doesn't get talked about enough, and the relation to which it affects masculinity, and how toxic femininity is largely, and I wouldn't say largely, but like it has its portion of responsibility for causing toxic masculinity. And I think that outright rejecting the notion of toxic masculinity is like a sort of a toxic idea in and of itself. Like, you know that it's part of a natural balance, part of the reality where there's extreme poles, and these aren't good aspects of the reality that we are in, but there is masculinity and there is femininity, and there is healthy femininity and there is healthy masculinity. Then obviously there would be equal amounts of, toxic and toxic of each, right? So like it's like kind of disingenuous to pretend that one doesn't exist and then try to have the conversation anyways. Like, we have to be sort of cognizant of, like, let's not try to push the scale or the balance of the scale in any way or favor. It's just we need to pay attention to this subject. And that's sort of the angle that I've been taking for over a decade. I was actually alienated from many of my family members who were sort of like self professed feminists. As I said, men don't need to take the back seat whenever it comes to helping women. There needs to be services for men going through and then I got like completely like torn apart and isolated, and I was like, you guys are acting vengeful, and like, oh, we've been through all this and now it's your turn, sort of is the way that it kind of came off. And certainly that was the case for many of the more extreme voices from that crowd. But the more like reasonable ones didn't necessarily echo the sentiment, but allowed the sentiment to sort of be the sort of pantheon that they engaged with. And so that was just something that ended up causing men to take the back seat. And I was constantly just trying to say, like, look, there's two sides to this coin. We don't want to end up, having a reverse issue. And they were like, oh, men are fine, they'll be fine, and this and that. And I was like, well, this is just ridiculous. But that's just how that went, which is hilarious because, in the end, we see people going through similar consequences for speaking out loud about ideas that they have, and in regards to what our popular cultural mores are right now. For example, Jordan Peterson right now is having his clinical license threatened to be revoked unless he undergoes some social media retraining, because he voices his opinion, which is, if you ask me, toxic femininity run amok, because part of what the use of men have been is to generate their sense of sort of ethics and responses to society's woes and voice those as leaders. And those who have the courage to speak up tend to be good guidance. And in the end, where we haven't found compromise in today's day, we see a lot of discord and we see a lot of conflict and we see a lot of emotional sort of responses, and nobody's happy. And this is causing everybody to hate each other, which is not healthy to an innovative and progressive society. Not in any stretch of the imagination, no matter which way you look at innovation, whether you think that there should be some aggression or change in perspective or whatever the case may be. So, I think that that's an interesting thing to pay attention to because when we see it, we're out here trying to voice our opinions and constantly being silenced, and being told that we're right wing and this and that and censored. But we're really the world around us and trying to use our logic. And when you try to control what's being said, then at the point it becomes disingenuous, and the person talking to you can tell it's disingenuous, and then they become entrenched in their side and you become entrenched in yours, and you're playing two different language games. So now I'm jumping into actually some blogs that I've written. This is subject matter to a couple of blogs that I've put together in the last couple of days. Zealotry in journalism, political zealotry in journalism, and societal hypersync, which is to do with synchronicity and the unconscious mind. The both of those articles are actually related to sort of what I'm talking about here, and how we all sort of sync up in unhealthy ways. If you really take in both of those articles in context with each other, you'll see what I kind of mean. Hopefully somebody does take a look at those. You can see them at my WordPress at tyronelamoureux.wordpress.com. So that is 100% something available for people to go looking through. Now, I really do hope that in regards to Jordan Peterson's clinical license being, I hope he was mentioning that he wants to take a camera in for his re-education, and I hope that he does, and I hope they allow it, because I'd really like to see some transparency in what the re-education process is supposed to be, because in the words re-education, in the contexts that I've read them in before, were not something to be celebrated, to be certain. That's 100% sure. And I'm not going to go ahead and name regions. I'm sure most people who have paid attention to the news know what I'm talking about. And if you don't know already, you can literally just search the internet for re-education camps and you'll find it. So, these are just things that I think that, we need to pay attention to. The fact that our government of Canada is like that and is engaging in that type of behavior is just crazy. As a result of the sort of segregation, or not but isolation and alienation of men, you know, families, elders, communities are taking men's opinions about politics and social issues less seriously. And I think that those are sort of smaller variables that are being ignored in the consequences or list of consequences that come from mental health of men and the men's health sort of movement. In the end, there's enough room for both genders to be celebrated, or however many genders there are, sorry, not to be inclusive, but at the end of the day, there's enough room for every individual to be included in the story of where we're going. And we don't need to, battle over resources, or we shouldn't have to, at the least, battle over resources in order to get education, in order to get emotional support, in order to get material support in situations where there's a crisis. These are not things that a human in a quote unquote developed country should have to deal with. And being isolated in their rooms, or their houses or bachelor apartments, or wherever it is that they are, and feeling that they can't talk to anybody. And even when they do talk to somebody, or go to talk to somebody, or feel ready to talk to somebody, it lands at wait times for an appointment, or it's a brief conversation to which 2 to 3 days later somebody reaches out and you're in a completely different mental state, because your mental health issue is one that wavers, it comes and goes. So you're no longer in the state where you're seeking that help, or whatever the case may be. Or even just because time has passed and events have occurred which have changed the dynamic, and you know what I mean. In the end, we all need to get help regardless of what the dynamics going on, but impressions change, and things and stories change, and the availability of these things for people in really crisis situations, who need the help right then and there, is not there. And typically families aren't there for them either, friends aren't there for them either. People are occupied by their own needs, by their own lives, by their own problems that they're trying to go through. And in all reality, even if they're willing to give an open ear, the level to which they can actually dedicate any type of sort of care to you is really a gigantic motion of philanthropy, of altruism, of selflessness, and nobody's obligated to that. So at the end of the day, where does a person have to go? They don't really have many places to go, and that's the problem. For women, there's tons. There's all kinds of resources, and that's just the truth. We've seen it. There's all kinds of just the ridiculous amounts of them as I've gone looking myself in different circumstances and situations. Nothing. I mean, if I wanted something for men, it was all the way in Toronto, and I'm in about an hour south of Ottawa. So, that just gives you an idea. So, I mean, beyond just that, the actual education system and the way that people are being taught. I feel even, some of the core structures of how, like, the teachers' perspectives exist. And some of like, just the way that community is taught and the role, and there's not a lot of male teachers, so maybe it becomes down to that, so that they're not being explained things from this sort of vantage point that uses vocabulary that, you know, just kind of gets that idea across that men have a value, that there's more to it than just having women as the knowledgeable blah blah blah, which was what the case was. I just watching a Big Think video. In the 1970s there was a disparity in education levels of like 13% between boys and girls, where girls were behind by 13%. So they had this whole, oh my god, that's such a big deal that there shouldn't be this disparity. So they put these laws into effect to make sure that girls were getting access to education and extra funding. And now the disparity is reversed, but we're at 18%, and everybody's like, no, no, guys are fine. When it was 13% for women, that's a really big deal, but 18% for women, for guys, it's fine. Like, they're allowed to suffer. When women are suffering, it's totally not okay, but when men's suffering, that's just the way it is. Men will be okay. They'll be fine. They were always being awesome before, and they were ahead of women before, and now they're not, and them being not ahead of us is okay. Like, we wanted parity, and now we have like an advantage and we're doing better and they're falling behind, and that's okay, because we wanted parity, and them not being equal with us but below is the same as parity to us, and we aren't a vengeful movement at all. I'm sorry for going on a bit of a rant, but it just, if we accept the fact that there's this disparity and we aren't putting funding into it and having the discussion about it makes somebody in somebody's mind a chauvinist or a misogynist, then that's just insane, because what they're saying is that for trying to get the same things that they were trying to get before, which is parity, were chauvinists, but they were not, or misogynists, but they weren't misandrists for trying to get the same thing before. And I've been told that I'm a misogynist and I'm this prejudiced person forever for communicating exactly this idea for like 10 years. And people have looked at me and my family like I'm this outcast, right-wing, bigoted person, when I'm not, because I'm trying to show people the patterns that I've seen developing for ages. And here we are. Anyways, Tyrone signing out. Have a good one, guys.